Good evening. My name is John Burns, and I'm the pastor of the University Baptist Church in College Park, Maryland. And we're doing an online Bible study on a series of studies called Prayers in Difficult Days. And certainly we can relate to that. We are in very difficult days as a nation. And so we're looking at prayers from people in the scripture who took their soul's concerns to the Lord, and we're trying to learn how to better pray in our own time of difficulty. And tonight we're going to center in on the prayer of Hannah. And Hannah had some unusual dynamics in her life, and uh, they were centering around, at least at first, what we call envy and also jealousy. I don't know if you've ever been jealous of another person. I used to have a friend who was very handsome, and every time he and I went anywhere, if we went out to eat, for instance, if there was a female server, she would just sort of flutter around him like he was a Greek god, and whatever he wanted, she would jump to, and I was sort of like a lamppost or that was unnoticed. He even preached for me once or twice, and when I came back, the congregation, especially the ladies, said, he can preach for you anytime. And I just felt jealous of this appraisal of him, the attention that he got. And I had to kind of work through that. Still, probably have a little of a remnant of that in my heart as well. I don't know if you ever feel jealousy or envy. Jealousy is usually defined as unhappiness in our hearts because we desire a relationship that somebody else has. Whereas envy is negative feelings in our heart because we desire a possession that somebody else has. Um, it's sort of normal for people to battle those kinds of feelings from time to time. And they can make us do unhappy things. They can lead us to do very negative things and make our life unhappy when it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's not that we desire what another person has, but we don't want them to have what they do have. We don't want it. We just don't want them to have it. There's a quote from the book Gilead where one of the main characters, Reverend Ames, he says, I don't know exactly what covetousness is, but in my experience, it's not so much desiring someone else's virtue or happiness as it is in rejecting it, taking offense at the beauty of it. So maybe you've felt those emotions. You don't want the boyfriend that the other girl has. You just don't want her to have that happiness. You don't want the car that your coworker drives. You just don't want him to have it. Those are not our highest Christian virtues. And so we have to work on these emotions of jealousy and envy. I don't know if you've ever said you were happy for someone and not fully meant it when they brought you good news. Now, if it doesn't really affect you, let's say somebody is going to have a baby and they announce that to you and you say, well, I'm happy for you, and you can mean that unless secretly you're carrying the burden that you want to have a child and that hasn't happened for you yet, and then maybe there's some negative feelings about that. I guess if you were in love with the same woman and somebody said, hey, I asked her to marry me and she said yes, you'd say, well, I'm happy for you, but you probably aren't that happy. But we can say that for people who are experiencing joys and good fortune that don't really impact upon us, joys and good fortune that we're not in competition for. But if we're striving for a promotion and our coworker gets it, it's sometimes hard to say with full, robust meaning, I'm happy for you, because we may not be that happy for them. So jealousy and envy, it gets into us, makes us unhappy. We'll talk about some of the other consequences of it. But in today's story, we have some women who are feeling both. We'll pick it up in 1 Samuel in chapter 1 and the very first verse. There was a certain man of Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah. He was the son of Jehoram, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his town to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to both his wife Peninnah and to Hannah, and to their sons and daughters. But he liked to give Hannah a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely, to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Well, if Elkanah had any bad character traits, low self-esteem was not one of them. He felt he had to be more important to Hannah than 10 sons, which maybe he was or maybe he was not. What we have here is the midst of strife between the 2 wives that Elkanah had married. Uh, in one of our online Bible studies, we heard from one of our members who grew up in a home where his father had more than 1 wife, and he described some of the hurt feelings that were just inherent in that system, where the children of another woman, another wife of the father, would get a lot more lavished upon them than the children of the wife who was less favored. We certainly see this here in sort of a reverse way, though. Now, when the Bible says that the Lord closed her womb, that's because in those days they thought God did everything. If lightning hit a house, God sent the lightning bolt. If famine broke out in the nation, God sent the famine. And today we're less confident in those kind of statements. A lot of things can happen to keep a person from conceiving and bearing a child if that's what she wants. But they felt in this time that the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. So when they went up to Shiloh, which was the place they went for worship before Jerusalem and the temple was built there, this kind of envy and jealousy became exacerbated because Hannah, she had some envy over the fact that Peninnah had these children, and she wanted children of her own. And to see Peninnah have these children caused her to envy those children, envy the privilege of childbirth. In reverse way, Peninnah had jealousy for Hannah because Elkanah lavished her with more material things to offer in sacrifice to God to show that he loved her a little bit more. Peninnah wished she had the relationship that Hannah had with Elkanah. Hannah had envy over the possessions or the children that Peninnah had. And so there was great strife among the 2 women. And Peninnah seems to have a mean streak. She just likes to provoke Hannah and point out that she can't have children and kind of rub that into the wound that she already felt, to where she would just weep and she wouldn't eat. She was in great grief and despair. That's envy and jealousy can create that in us. I made a little list of things that I thought of that envy and jealousy create. First of all, it causes us to undervalue what we have. We can't see the beauty of our own home. We can't see the joy of our own relationships. We can't see the adequacy of God's provision in our life because we're always looking over the fence at what the neighbors have or see on TV what other people have, and we're unhappy about that. We have envy and jealousy about that. It undervalues what we have. It also overvalues what other people have. We sometimes look from a distance at somebody else's life and think, wow, they got it all. Money, physical appearance, great relationships, wonderful children, a wonderful job. And yet, if you take a little closer look, sometimes you see that things aren't all as they first seemed. So we can overvalue what somebody else has. Thirdly, it makes us dissatisfied with what God has provided. God is our provider, and God has promised to provide us with what we need in this life. And when we're always dissatisfied with it, it creates a barrier between ourselves and God. And we can't feel the blessing of God because we're always focused on the things we don't have or the things that somebody else does have. It can also make us feel like we have been treated unfairly. That's not a good feeling, to think, everybody else gets these good things and I am denied them. I've worked all my life for things and everything comes hard for me, and now we got sickness, or we got this problem, or my wife doesn't love me, or my husband is divorcing me and I've been treated unfairly. Look at those other families, they get it all. That's not an accurate way of looking at life, and it creates a very dismal kind of feeling inside. We can also become estranged from the people for whom we are jealous, or for whom we are envious. It's hard to be jealous or envious of a friend and feel close to them. It's hard to be jealous or envious of another family member, maybe a sibling or a cousin or even a child or even a parent. If we feel that kind of jealousy or envy, sibling rivalry, for instance, there is estrangement that builds into that relationship. Uh, we can Jealousy and envy can cause us to get in financial trouble because we overspend to try to keep up with our neighbors, keep up with those who we want to have as much as they have, or the things that they have. It can lead to very painful extramarital affairs. That's what creates a lot of extramarital affairs. Someone looks at somebody else's husband or wife or relationship and desires that. They idealize it. They think, oh, that's what I need, that's what I want, that's what I deserve, and it takes them down a road that is extremely destructive. It can cause us to tear down the very people we love. If I'm jealous or envious of someone that I love, then I criticize them more. I try to tear them down, cut them off at the knees so we'll be the same height, or all these kind of phrases and turns of phrases that we use. It causes us to hurt people. If we're jealous of the attention that our parents give a sibling, we can become extremely critical and vicious of that. If we're jealous of the success that our spouse has, that can become very bitter, can be very difficult. Lastly, jealousy and envy can even lead us to commit acts of violence. That's sort of the definition of manslaughter, where we take another person's life out of some great emotional outpouring. So none of this is good. So we have to learn to accept God's love for us as we are, to accept God's provision as it is, to know that we are enough in this world, even though we may not have everything others have, but that we are enough, that we are people of value, and that God loved us, Jesus died for us, God created us, and that we have tremendous value, even though we may not have everything that somebody else has. And to know that if we had what they had, it wouldn't improve our value in the sight of God, and probably would not enhance our happiness to any great degree. Let's read on in this story. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Lord. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting at the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Hannah was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. She made this vow: O Lord of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazarite until the day of his death. He shall not drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently. Only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, "How long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine." But Hannah answered, "No, my lord. I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of great anxiety and vexation all this time." Then Eli answered, "Go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." And she said, "Let your servant find favor in your sight." Then the woman went to her quarters. She ate and drank with her husband, and her countenance was sad no longer. Well, she's praying, and she's praying privately, and so she's not saying any words out loud. And Eli sees her lips move, but he doesn't hear any words, and he assumes she's drunk. And he chastises her. "Why are you coming in here drunk on this day?" And she says, "No, don't count me as a worthless woman." You see, she doesn't want Eli to think of her the way I think she thinks of herself, or maybe she projects the way her husband thinks of her, in that she's not been able to bear a child. And in their culture, that often made a woman feel worthless. She said, "Don't think of me as a worthless woman. I've been talking to God, and I've made God a promise. If God will give me a male child, then I will make that male child take the Nazarite vow, which means he will never drink alcohol of any form. He won't cut his hair. He'll be dedicated to the Lord." And we know down the road that he will come and serve the Lord in the temple even as a child. She's making a bargain with God. And we have to stop here to say, is that a good way to pray? In most cases, we're told not to bargain with God, that we're to trust God to do what is right. We're to present our petitions before God, but not to try to manipulate God in some way. However, she felt this burden so keenly, I think it was important for her to express it to the Lord, even though she might not have expressed it in the theologically perfect way. Roberta Bondi talks about what prayer is for us. And she talks about it being like a conversation between friends. Listen to what she wrote. "When friends don't tell each other what they have on their minds, it destroys the friendship. This is another grounds for intercessory prayer. It doesn't matter that God already knows everything. For the sake of friendship, God needs us to say what we want. Whether we get it or not is a different matter. You don't always get what you ask for from your friend either. Maybe most of the time you don't get it, but you need to say what it is you need and want." Well, if Roberta Bondi is right, then Hannah needed to tell God what was in her heart, what she wanted. And this bargaining just indicates the intensity with which she wanted it. Have you ever bargained with God in prayer? "God, you give me this job and I will be faithful to serve you. God, you give me this raise and I will be more generous with my tithes and offerings. God, you give me a child and I'll dedicate my life to raising that child. God, you give me this relationship and give me this marriage and I'll be the most perfect husband." We make these. These are sort of human bargains that come from deep interior to our soul. And it may not be the most theologically correct way to pray. I would say it is not. I'm often reminded of an old Burt Reynolds movie, and the name of it escapes me. And most of you are looking at me right now won't even know who Burt Reynolds is, so it doesn't really matter. But it's a movie, tragically. It was supposed to be funny, but he tries to take his own life many ways because he's dying of cancer, and he doesn't want to face that. And on one occasion, he swims out to sea as far as he can swim, and then he gets ready to just drown. And then he has a renewal of interest in living. And so he turns around and starts swimming back to shore, and he's wearing out. He doesn't think he's going to make it. And so with every stroke, he makes God a new promise. "God, if you get me to the sure, I'll give you 30% of everything I own, and I'll quit cussing, and I won't womanize anymore, and I'll be faithful to my wife. And he just makes all these promises to God. Finally, he just wears out, and he puts his feet down thinking this is the end. He's going to die, and his feet hit the bottom of the sea, and he can stand up with his head above water. And immediately he says to the Lord, well, Lord, just like I said, I'll give you 5% of everything I make. Already his bargain is no good. That's the problem with bargaining. We usually don't keep our part of the bargain. But Hannah has laid this out to the Lord, and she's laid it out with great emotion. We can see that in that her lips are moving, but she's making no sound. It's a private prayer. And I think our private prayers are supposed to be different than our public prayers. It says that she was pouring out her soul before God. We need privacy when we're pouring out our soul before God. What would cause you to pour your soul out before God? I would imagine it would be something pretty emotional, pretty powerful. Have you ever tried to be that honest with God? Not worried about what God's going to think about what you say, not saying it aloud so you don't have to worry about what other people think when you say it, just telling God the true, unvarnished desires of your heart. Confess it all, say it all. Maybe you want to say, God, I know I should be this way, but this is the way I'm feeling. Lord, I know that jealousy will harm this relationship, but I'm feeling jealousy. Lord, I know that envy is a destructive tendency, but I got a lot of envy. Just sharing it with God, pouring your heart out before God. Maybe your wishes, your desires. What is it that is in your heart right now? You don't have to edit yourself. You don't have to figure out, well, is this proper? Just tell the Lord. Lay it out there. Be honest with God. Don't worry whether it's theologically correct or not. If it's in your soul, your heart, lay it out before God. Let God see it all. I like what William Sloane Coffin wrote. He said, in prayer, we tend to try to put our best foot forward, but it's always the other one that needs the attention. So why try to hide it? Tell God about the worst foot that's in the back, hidden. Let God see it both. And if you're feeling like bargaining with God, go ahead and try. See what happens. Hannah admits that she's been praying with great anxiety and vexation. Jesus taught us we're not to have anxiety and vexation. And so maybe we would feel like, oh, I shouldn't tell Jesus about my worries. He told me not to worry. He told me worry was sin. I'm going to hide that from the Lord. No, we know better than that. We're not going to hide anything from the Lord. Might as well just pour out our heart and express the worries and the vexations of our heart. Eli heard her request, and then Eli said that God would grant her petition. And then we read this. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. Elkanah knew his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I have asked him of the Lord. The word Shem means to name. The word Shema means to hear. We know that from Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God, and that's called the Shema prayer. It means to hear. El always means God. So Samuel, the clearest interpretation means Samuel means the one that God heard me. God heard my cry. And so she names her son to remind him and to remind her that God heard her cry. Later on, Samuel's going to learn how to hear God, and then this hearing is going to take on a new dimension when God calls Samuel, and he runs in to ask if Eli is calling his name, and Eli finally says, you tell the Lord, speak, Lord, for your servant heareth. So Samuel's whole life is about hearing God, just like his mother said, God heard me and gave me this son. There is no perfect way to pray. We can break the rules of prayer and still be heard because God looks on the intimacy of our heart, the privacy of our heart. If we try to use flowery, impressive words to persuade God, we're just wasting our breath. because God's looking deeper than that. If we try to hide what's down in there, the deeper feelings and concerns and worries and desires and even envies and jealousies that we harbor, if we try to hide that, we're wasting our effort there too. We can just lay it out there before God, tell God exactly what we want, even offer to sweeten the pot if we need to. Because here's the deal. We don't have to purify our heart before we pray. No. If you did that, nobody would pray. If it was only pure hearts that God heard, you know, none of us would get very far. It's actually in prayer that our heart is purified. So we tell God what we want, and we tell God when we want it and how we want it. And then in the intimacy and communion of prayer, God's able to kind of work on our soul and to let us know, yeah, that isn't going to happen, or that's not going to happen yet, or that's not even a proper desire, or if I were to give you that, your life would be infinitely worse than it is right now. We work it out in conversation and relationship. You don't have to get it all straight. I don't have to get it all perfect before I go to God in prayer. Now, in those kind of rough around the edges prayers, though, we need to follow Hannah's example and make sure they're in private. To stand up before the church and pray out the full confession of our heart is, I think, what people call TMI, too much information out there. I'm not sure why people do that. I come from a tradition where used to have revivals in the spring, and there were usually testimony times, and on occasion somebody stood up and shared more with the church than most people thought they should have shared. I wouldn't, I don't think I'd have said that to everybody, is the way people sometimes responded. And we don't need to pour out our heart publicly. That can be like Hannah, privately, without words, before God, which gives us a shield and a cloak to be just totally honest with God and trust that God will respond. In this case, Hannah got what she prayed for. She got this boy and raised him as a Nazarite and raised him as a servant of Eli's in the church, and he grew up to be a major prophet. We don't always get what we ask for, but it is sometimes in the asking that our heart is changed and purified. These days I have a prayer that I pray every day, and that is that God will fill me with love, so that the ministries I do, and so that my role as a father and husband and uh, neighbor and pastor, that what I do, I don't do for credit. It's not a performance. And I don't do it simply out of duty or obligation or guilt, but that I do whatever it is that I offer this world with love. And I can tell you, without giving you TMI, that I'm not there yet. And I still do a lot of things because I'm afraid somebody will be mad if I don't do it. And I still want a little credit. My ego still stands up and says, hey, somebody noticed what I've done. And I still do things just out of obligation and duty, trying to be faithful. And that's not bad, but doing it out of love is better. And so that's my prayer. And my heart's not purified yet, but I'm hopeful that if I stay with this, God will make me new. So pray. Don't worry about breaking the rules. Pray. Don't worry about being pure or perfect. Pray. Tell God your needs. And Philippians says, don't forget to thank God for the answers that come, even if the answer is not the one you wanted. Thanks for joining us for this Bible study. Next week, we're going to be looking at the prayers of Nehemiah. So come back and be with us, and we'll look at how he prayed. Nehemiah believed he was in the right place at the right time to do something great for God. And we're going to hope that we can find that to be true of our own lives as well. See you next week. Thanks. Bye.